Hello there, Drew Hanish of Whiskey Lore. Time for a Matchup Monday, and today I am going with my favorite Speyside distillery. Now, in the past, I have talked about Benromach being my favorite Speyside distillery. They have been unseated. Almost was unseated by Glenglassaugh at one point, but Torfa has gone away, so that has made it much easier for Benromach to come in as my favorite distillery. And the reason that I love this distillery is because it brings some of those Speyside sherry characteristics, but there's also a little hint of smoke in there. So it's a nice little mixture. Now, I had brought back with me from Scotland the bottle of their Contrast series, the peat smoke version, and loved that bottle so much that it no longer is in the house. It has been emptied out. And so when I was in Kentucky for an event and doing some research, I decided to bring back a bottle of Benromach 10 because I found some at a store up there. And so it's just, I just love this stuff. And so, but I was intrigued because I have not been able to find the modern label around here in the United States. But for some reason, I keep digging around and finding these old bottles. Now, how old is this bottle? Let me just tell you, this label was done away with in April of 2014. So this label is at least 10 years old. And so because they had another brand in between where they actually scribbled on the bottle itself. So this is, two versions back in terms of their branding on this. But what makes this comparison that I'm going to do today more intriguing is the fact that this isn't a bottle that I've had open for 7 or 8 years. It's a bottle that I just opened last year. So it is still basically a fresh bottle of whiskey that is 10 years older than this. So the questions you have to ask yourself is, what variables might change here? Because we're talking about a single malt. Now, they are peat smoking it. 12 ppm is what Benromach uses now. I'm not sure what they used back then. Probably around the same. Maybe not. On top of that, their barrel processes are different. Now, on the older version, the way they used to age it was 80%, they would have 80% of it coming from ex-bourbon barrels. Would not say whether first fill or not, but they were coming from ex-bourbon barrels. Then 20% was coming from sherry barrels. They would marry those together and age them. So those were aged 9 years. They would put them together in a first fill Oloroso barrel for the last year. Now, I cannot find any detailed information about how they are using barrels for this whiskey. They're both 10 years old, so this is the modern version, basically, of that whiskey. But all it says is that they only use first fill barrels, but they don't necessarily tell you what type of barrel that they are using, just exclusively first fill cask matured. So, finest oak, sherry notes. So we get a sense that they've been aged in a sherry barrel, but what else? Not really sure. Now, another thing to pay attention to would be the coloration of the whiskey, because, of course, the barrel's going to have some impact on that, but we are also in an age where everybody's talking about no color added, and the 10-year-old current version says natural color. So is there a coloration difference between these two whiskeys? Boy, if there is, it is really, really close. So then you have to question, well, were they adding color to this or not? Maybe they didn't really need to at that point. It is hard to say. So no, it does not say anywhere in here about them using using natural color versus adding color to it. So Maybe a drop just for consistency or whatever it may be, but I'm not seeing much of a difference in terms of the color. Now, what about the rest of the whiskey? How has this changed? Are these going to be the same? Will a whiskey be the same 10 years later? I've always been very intrigued by that idea. Okay, and this is the new. And this one, there's this really nice kind of smoked bacon note in here. The smoke is there. Maybe a hint of raspberry in the background. I get some of those Speyside characteristics, the apple and pear, but very light on this. Probably more pear. Well, I say that. There's a little green apple in the background there. And it's somewhat minerally, actually. So how does it do versus the old version? It's very different. The smoke is not as prevalent. There is no bacon note in this. If anything, this is more earthy. Even a slight medicinal character to it, which it's not really an Islay whiskey, so it's far from Islay. But maybe something that reminds me of the more medicinal style whiskeys. Just very light though. The nose is not as strong on this one for sure. All right, let's do a tasting. Raspberry, caramel, a little nuttiness in there as well. A little bit of smoke coming through, mild, but those sherry notes are definitely there, and I don't know. I mean, I almost think that this is heading much more into a PX cask than it is an Oloroso sherry cask. But it definitely uses an Oloroso cask. So I'm wondering if that 20% sherry is actually maybe coming from a sweeter barrel. A little bit of chocolate on the end, just a light bit. Maltiness coming through as well on that whiskey there on the finish. So the earthiness doesn't come through on the palate as much. The smokiness is there, but it's very light. All right, let's jump in and jump on this one, which had much more of, like I say, that kind of bacon note coming through. Maybe even a little bit of burnt toast, actually. I almost want to put it down to a creosote kind of a note, but it's not aggressive. But the smoke is definitely stronger in this. Cheers. A little heavier on the palate, actually. A lot more oak notes in this. The wood really takes over on this, and then the smoke is coming in on the end. So it's not as fruity as what I was getting out of the other whiskey. Not necessarily getting the chocolate notes out of this either. Interesting. Let me take a second go with this. Yeah. Almost get like an olive oiliness in there. Really different, very different on the palate from that first. I'm going to go back to the first again because I'm not believing that this amount of fruit, the sherry notes are not there. I mean, I'm trying to find them, but I'm getting a lot more char and peat smoke on the end of this whiskey than on the older 10. It might be a flavor that's hard to burn off the palate this easily. There's a little chocolate note. I drank some water and all of a sudden I'm getting a little chocolate note. Yes, the sherry notes come through a whole lot more in that, and the caramel notes are coming through a little stronger as well. Actually, I'm going to pause for a second. Okay, it took a second, didn't it? There's something new here. I brought some water with me because I want to add a little bit of water to this and see if that stirs this one up at all. And before I do this tasting, just a reminder, if you have not joined patreon.com/whiskylore yet, you might want to do that. I am going to start moving the actual videos of the interviews over to that exclusively from this point forward, mainly because YouTube kind of punishes me for having long videos and then having short videos. So I'm going to be moving those over there at this point. So I'd love to have you over there. And in fact, Lost History in Tennessee Whiskey, we're going to start on Monday of next week on YouTube doing, and on Patreon, doing a book reading. And so you get to hear chapter 1, and we will carry that on as long as you guys enjoy it. And you'll get a chance to breeze through the book. But it's going to be available on Patreon, but only next Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on YouTube. So keep that in mind as well. All right, adding a drop of water to this to see what happens. Cheated, 2 drops of water. How about that? Still very heavy on the bacon and smoke. Maybe a touch, but it is definitely much more heavy on the smoke side of things. Let's see what it did to the older version. I was reading the old website. If you've ever been on archive.org, if you've not been on archive.org, you should go out there because they have, basically collected websites all the way back to 2008, 2007, 2000. You can go back and look at the old version of Yahoo and Google and all of that. It's pretty amazing, but I went back and looked at the old Benromach site. That's how I figured out April 2014 is when they changed their branding. This actually lifted some of the smoky notes up in this. Dusty kind of note coming through. Still punches a lot more in terms of that sherry barrel. Yeah, big time difference between these two. And then that caramel and nuttiness comes through on the finish. So on the old version, the smoke was much more kind of a side bit to the experience, whereas in the new version, the oak and the smoke really are standing out in front a whole lot more. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you over on patreon.com/whiskylore sometime soon. And if you want to leave your comments, you can do so below. And then, like I say, tomorrow, the interview with Beth Buckner from Maker's Mark, that is going to be over on Patreon, or you can find it on your favorite podcast app. And until next time, cheers and Slainte.